There is a kind of love that does not need an audience, and, yet, somehow, the whole world ends up watching anyway. It was not a kiss. It was not a grand gesture rehearsed behind palace doors. It was not a statement drafted by a communications team or a moment engineered for a camera positioned at exactly the right angle. It was smaller than all of that, and it was bigger than all of that. It was a man leaning slightly toward his wife while the ancient stone walls of Westminster Abbey rose above them both, and a woman turning to him with a smile that did not belong to any official function on any royal calendar. It belonged only to him. And, in the space of a single heartbeat, the entire country seemed to exhale at once. People had been watching William and Catherine for years. They had watched them wave from balconies and walk red carpets and read prepared speeches in rooms full of dignitaries who clapped at exactly the right moments. They had watched them perform the enormous, unblinking duty of being the future of a monarchy, steady, gracious, always appropriate, always composed. They had watched Catherine in her most formal jewels and William in his most formal expression and told themselves that this was what a royal couple looked like. Polished. Distant. Magnificent in a way that kept you at arm's length. But, Commonwealth Day, March 2026, was different. The reason it was different had everything to do with the year that had come before it. Because what the world had also watched, far less comfortably, with something closer to grief than admiration, was Catherine disappear. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But, slowly, across the months of 2023 and into 2024, the Princess of Wales had stepped back from the public world in a way that sent quiet ripples of concern through the people who had grown used to seeing her. There were explanations given carefully, in measured language, and, then, there was the announcement that stopped everyone cold. Cancer. The word landed like something dropped from a great height. And, then, the waiting began. It is a particular kind of waiting, the kind that sits in the chest of a nation that does not quite know how to say that it has become attached to someone it has never met. Royal watchers talked around it in forums and comment sections and WhatsApp groups. They said things like, "I just hope she's okay," in a way that meant something more complicated. They had watched her grow up in front of cameras. They had watched her become a wife, a mother, a working royal of remarkable steadiness. They had watched her stand at the edge of profound personal grief, the death of a queen she loved, the fracturing of a family she navigated with quiet dignity, and never once lose her footing. And now she was gone from view, and nobody quite knew what they were going to do with that. And then, in January 2025, she said the word that brought every held breath out at once. Remission. The announcement came simply, without theater, in the way that Catherine had always done the most significant things. She said that her preventative chemotherapy treatment had been completed. She said that she was well. She said she was looking forward to returning to her work and to the life she loved. And the world, that strange, scattered, complicated world that had been quietly holding its breath for her, let it go. What followed was a return. Not a sudden reappearance, but a careful, considered, deeply human re-entry into public life. She appeared at events with color in her face and steadiness in her step. She was photographed with her children. She stood beside William at engagements that mattered to both of them, and the cameras caught something between them that was harder to name than presence or beauty or elegance. It was something that looked very much like gratitude. The particular gratitude of two people who had walked through something dark together and come out the other side with their hands still linked. By the time Commonwealth Day arrived in March 2026, Catherine had been back in full public duties for months. She had found her rhythm again. The jewels were back, the coats were back, the careful wave from the car window was back. But something had shifted in the way the public looked at her. The polish they had always admired now sat on top of something they could feel more clearly: a real person, a woman who had been frightened and had kept going anyway, who had faced something enormous and chosen, when the time came, to walk back into the light. Westminster Abbey on Commonwealth Day has its own particular texture. It is not a museum, though it holds centuries of history in every stone. It is not merely a church, though the language of faith fills its arches on days like this one. It is something in between, a place where the weight of the past and the demands of the present meet in a single afternoon of ceremony, song, and quiet symbolism. The 56 nations of the Commonwealth bring their colors and their sounds and their stories to this building once a year, and the building absorbs all of it with a kind of ancient patience. This year's service carried its own quiet symbolism before a single note was sung. The Commonwealth was marking its 77th anniversary. The world premiere of a new Commonwealth symphony composed by Rikesh Chauhan was scheduled. There would be dance, classical ballet fused with Bollywood, students from the Royal Ballet School moving alongside performers from Supni Entertainments Ltd in a piece that was, in its very form, an argument for what the Commonwealth claimed to be. There would be a poem from Selina Tusitala Marsh, the first Commonwealth Poet Laureate. Jerry Halliwell Horner would speak. Odie Mabuse would offer a reflection that would leave several people in the pews dabbing at the corners of their eyes. It was the kind of service designed to remind everyone in the room and everyone watching of something larger than themselves. But what the cameras found, again and again, was two people sitting together in a pew, and the way they leaned toward each other when they thought no one was looking. Catherine arrived wearing a deep red Catherine Walker coat dress, a choice that read, to anyone paying attention, as deliberate. Red is the color of presence. Red is the color of return. It was the color she had worn to the 2025 service too, a year earlier, when her reappearance at Westminster Abbey after her cancer treatment had made headlines around the world. To wear it again in 2026 was something that could have been coincidence, but felt like statement. Around her throat, she wore a 4-strand pearl and diamond choker that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth II, a piece of jewelry that carried its own quiet freight of history and love and continuity. Her earrings, too, were from the late Queen's collection. She looked, as one observer put it, as though she had earned the right to every single thing she was wearing. William walked beside her, as he always does, in the way of a man who knows that his job at moments like this is not to be noticed. His job is proximity. His job is the slight angle of a shoulder that says, I am here. He does it naturally, which is perhaps the most remarkable thing about it, because nothing about their life is natural in the way that ordinary people mean the word. Everything is observed. Everything is documented. Everything is assigned meaning by a public that has decided, collectively, that the story of William and Catherine belongs, in some small part, to all of them. And yet he manages to make it look like something between just the two of them. Sir Keir Starmer had arrived ahead of the royal family, as protocol required. King Charles and Queen Camilla entered Westminster Abbey together, Camilla resplendent in her own red coat, the two of them carrying the particular gravity of a couple who had also walked through fire and found, on the other side, something solid. Princess Anne arrived with Sir Timothy Lawrence. The Abbey filled, row by row, with the representatives of 56 nations and the dignitaries of one very old monarchy. And then, William and Catherine walked in. The air in the room changed. Not dramatically. Not in the way of a gasp or a cheer. More the way a room changes when the people everyone has come to see arrive, a slight collective shift of attention, a leaning forward, a focusing. Cameras that had been pointed at the architecture swung gently to the doors. Eyes that had been studying programs looked up. Catherine walked with her head up and her expression composed in that way she has perfected over 20 years of public life, warm, engaged, present, but contained. She looked at the people around her with the particular attention of someone who has learned that every person she meets in a setting like this will remember it. She gave that attention genuinely, which is the thing that has always made her remarkable. It is not performance. It is the real version of the thing that performers try to fake. William was beside her. Close. The kind of close that is not about physical proximity but about attention. He was tracking her without tracking her, aware of her without making it visible to everyone in the room. Or almost without making it visible. Because there were cameras, and cameras caught it, and what they caught became the moment that hundreds of thousands of people would share across the internet in the hours and days that followed. It was simply this, the two of them, seated, leaning slightly toward each other. A private conversation in the middle of a very public room. Her face turned toward him with an expression that was not the composed public face but the other one, the face that belongs to their kitchen on an ordinary morning, to school runs and school plays and bedtimes and all the unglamorous, irreplaceable texture of a life built together. His face turned toward hers with an attention that had nothing to do with duty. They were not performing love for the cameras. They simply forgot, for a moment, that the cameras were there. And that was the moment. That was exactly the moment that royal fans could not stop watching. Because what they saw was not a prince and a princess. What they saw was a husband and a wife who had been through something real and had come out the other side, still turning toward each other in the middle of a room full of people, still finding each other across the noise of everything the world required of them. The Abbey was full of music and history and the weight of 77 years of Commonwealth idealism. The choir had begun to sing. The ceremony was about to unfold with all its careful choreography of symbol and tradition and forward-looking hope. And, in the middle of all of it, William leaned a little closer to Catherine and said something only she could hear. She smiled. Not the public smile. The other one. And something about the sight of it, something about the simple human fact of a woman smiling at her husband in a building where they had promised each other everything 15 years before, hit the people watching in a place that had nothing to do with protocol or monarchy or the careful machinery of royal public relations. It hit them somewhere quiet and private, in the part of themselves that hopes love like that is real. It was. There is something about Westminster Abbey that does something to people. Even people who have been there before. Even people who have stood inside it dozens of times, who know its dimensions and its history and the particular quality of its silence between movements of music. It still gets them. There is something in the stone, perhaps something in the accumulation of centuries of human prayer and grief and coronation and marriage and goodbye pressed into the walls like fingerprints. Walk in and the air is different. Thicker. More loaded with meaning than ordinary air has any right to be. For Catherine, the Abbey was not merely a ceremonial location on a calendar. It was the place where her life changed shape. On a morning in April 2011, she had walked down that aisle not as a princess or a public figure or a symbol of anything, she had walked down it as a woman in love with a man who was waiting at the far end with the kind of expression that people only wear once. The world had watched that walk. 2 billion people, it was said, had watched that walk. And she had done it with her head up and her eyes forward and the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going. 15 years later, she was back. Not walking the aisle. Not in a cloud of ivory silk with the weight of a cathedral and a watching world on her shoulders. She was sitting in a pew beside her husband, dressed in red, wearing the pearls of a queen she had loved and mourned, watching a service that celebrated the connections between 56 nations. She was doing what she had done for 15 years of marriage, sitting beside him, present, composed, carrying the public part of herself with the grace that had become, over time, as natural to her as breathing. But it was the private part that everyone was watching. The Commonwealth Day service of March 2026 moved the way these services always move, with intention, with beauty, with the particular rhythm of ceremony that has been refined over decades. The world premiere of the Commonwealth Symphony opened a door in the room that pure silence could not have opened. Rakesh Chauhan's composition moved through the Abbey with the quality of something vast and interconnected, different themes finding each other, pulling apart, resolving into something larger than any single strand. People in the pews who had arrived thinking about their phones and their schedules found themselves, somewhat against their will, moved. Catherine was one of them. People watching the footage later would notice the moment, the slight shift in her expression as the music built, the way her attention deepened and became something more than polite attendance. Music had always done things to her that royal composure was not quite quick enough to conceal. She let it show. Just a little. Just enough. William noticed. He always notices. This is the thing about watching the two of them over years of footage and photographs and observed public moments. William watches Catherine. Not in a way that is possessive or performative. In a way that is simply attentive. He tracks her the way people track something they value without always knowing they are doing it. A glance when she speaks. A small adjustment toward her when the crowd presses in. The particular quality of his stillness when she is moving through a room as though his job, in those moments, is simply to be the fixed point she can orient by if she needs to. She had needed to, this past year, more than usual. The cancer treatment had taken things from her that were not visible in any photograph. It had taken the easy confidence of a healthy body. It had taken the assumption of tomorrow that most people carry without even knowing they carry it. It had taken something from her relationship with her own reflection, her own strength, her own capacity to move through the world at the pace and energy she had always brought to it. These are not small things to lose. They are, in fact, enormous things, the kind of things that reorder a person's understanding of what matters and what does not, and leave them standing on the other side of an illness different in ways they are still discovering. William had been beside her for all of it. This is the part of their story that the public only glimpsed in fragments, in the careful, controlled statements about her recovery, in the measured acknowledgement of a difficult period, in the absence that spoke louder than any press release. What happened inside the walls of Adelaide Cottage during those months of treatment and recovery was theirs alone. But the shape of it was legible in the way they moved around each other now. There was a new quality in their proximity. A new deliberateness in the way he positioned himself near her at public events. A new ease in the way she leaned into his presence instead of simply standing beside it. They had been tested in the way marriages are tested when fear enters the room and sits down and refuses to leave. And they had not broken. They had moved closer. The service continued. The dance performance that blended classical ballet with Bollywood filled the Abbey with something joyful and unexpected, the Royal Ballet School students moving with precision beside Supney Entertainment's performers who brought an entirely different physical language to the same space, and the two languages finding, improbably and beautifully, a shared rhythm. People smiled. Several laughed with surprised delight. The Prince and Princess of Wales were among them. Cameras caught them in the laughter. Side by side, caught off guard by something genuinely lovely, laughing the way people laugh when they have not prepared a response and the only available one is real. William's laugh arrived first, sudden and unguarded. Catherine's followed a beat behind, the kind of laugh that happens in the body before it happens on the face. They turned to each other in the midst of it, the instinctive turn of two people who have spent enough years together to have made a habit of sharing delight, and, for a moment the cameras had them both at once, mid-laugh, mid-turn, mid the most ordinary and extraordinary thing in the world. A couple enjoying something together. Royal fans who saw the footage and the photographs did the thing they always do, they dissected it, celebrated it, projected onto it, and ultimately arrived at the same conclusion that they always arrive at when they watch these two people move through the world together. Which is that whatever else is complicated about the institution they represent, whatever criticism one might level at the machinery of monarchy and the contradictions it contains, the thing between William and Catherine appears to be genuine. This matters to people more than it probably should, and exactly as much as it does. Because stories of genuine love are not as common as the world pretends they are. The glossy versions, the fairy tale engagements and the perfect portraits and the carefully curated social media romances that turn out to be performance are common enough. But the real version, the version that holds up across 15 years and 3 children and the grinding demands of an extraordinary public life and the private terror of a cancer diagnosis and the 1,000 invisible negotiations of 2 ambitious, complicated, feeling human beings trying to make something lasting, that version is rarer. And when people think they are seeing it, they lean toward it the way they lean toward warmth. They were leaning toward William and Catherine. The Abbey had settled into the later sections of the service, the readings, the reflections, the address from Jerry Halliwell Horner about the Commonwealth's capacity to connect people across borders and backgrounds and histories. Ori Mabu's reflection carried the weight of someone who has moved between cultures her whole life and knows, in her body, what the Commonwealth's stated ideals feel like when they are real and what they feel like when they are merely decorative. The first Commonwealth poet laureate read her poem into a silence that the Abbey held like a held breath. Through all of it, William and Catherine sat together. Their body language told a story that no poet laureate needed to write down. His shoulder tilted almost imperceptibly toward hers. Her head turned when he said something. His eyes found hers across a shared reaction to something beautiful. Small. Private. The vocabulary of a long marriage spoken quietly in a very public room. What the cameras also captured, and what became, in the hours after the service, the image that circulated most widely and prompted the most commentary, was a moment between the two of them that happened in the brief pause between one element of the service and the next. A moment of institutional stillness. The kind of pause that exists in all ceremonies, when the choir is settling, when the next speaker is finding their place, when the mechanics of a long service breathe briefly. In that pause, William leaned toward Catherine. Not dramatically. Not with any theatrics. Simply leaned, the lean of a man who has been sitting beside the same woman for many years and has not run out of things to say to her. He said something that none of the cameras and none of the microphones could capture. Whatever he said, it was his. It was for her. She received it the way she receives things from him, with her whole face. Not the public face, not the composed and gracious face that belonged to the service and the cameras and the hundreds of people in the pews. The other face. The face that is simply hers. The one that has laugh lines and a directness in the eyes that photographs don't always catch, and a quality of attention that means she is entirely present for the person in front of her. She laughed again. Softly, privately, the sound lost to the Abbey's ambient quiet. And then, she leaned back toward him. Said something in return. He smiled. It was 15 years of marriage in the space of a few seconds, a private language spoken in public, a marriage that had grown up in front of cameras and, somehow, against the odds, remained its own thing, something that belonged to the two people living it rather than to the institution surrounding it or the audience watching it. Something that was not diminished by being observed but was not, fundamentally, for the observation. People watching the footage and seeing the photographs would feel the distinction. Would feel themselves in the presence of something that was not performed for them, and would like it all the more for that reason. There is a version of royal life in which everything is stagecraft, in which the smiles are calibrated and the closeness is choreographed and the human moments are manufactured with careful precision by people whose job it is to make royals seem relatable. This version exists. It has existed throughout royal history, and the evidence of it is not hard to find. The machinery of image management is real and sophisticated, and it grinds away quietly behind every public appearance, smoothing and framing and controlling the narrative. But some things the machinery cannot manufacture. It cannot manufacture the look on a man's face when he glances at his wife and finds, after 15 years, that he is still glad she is there. It cannot manufacture the quality of a woman's laugh when it happens before she has thought about it. It cannot manufacture the angle of a shoulder, the tilt of a head, the small unconscious adjustments of two bodies that have spent enough years together to have learned each other's gravity. These things are either there or they are not. At Westminster Abbey, on Commonwealth Day 2026, they were there. And the world, watching, felt something it did not entirely expect to feel, not admiration for the institution, not interest in the spectacle, not the complicated mix of critique and fascination that usually attends royal coverage. Something simpler. Something that arrived quietly and sat in the chest for a moment before dispersing. Something that felt, if you let it, a little like hope. The service was not yet over. The hymns were still ahead. The national anthem would ring through the Abbey in a few minutes, voices from 56 nations rising together into the stone vault of a building that had held the sound of human voices for 1,000 years. There would be photographs on the steps outside, the royal family arranged carefully, smiling for the cameras, performing the version of themselves that the occasion required. But first there was this. First there was a husband leaning toward his wife in a pew, and a wife leaning back, and something passing between them that had nothing to do with any of it, not the ceremony, not the Commonwealth, not the cameras, not the watching world. Just the two of them, in the building where they made their promises, still keeping them. The internet, when it decides it loves something, loves it loudly. Within hours of the Commonwealth Day service ending, the footage and photographs were moving across social media platforms with the speed and intensity of something people could not stop themselves from sharing. Not because it was dramatic. Not because anything scandalous had happened or any protocols had been broken or any statement had been made that required interpretation. Because of the opposite reason entirely. Because what people had seen was quiet and small and human, and the world, which is so often overwhelmed by the large and the loud and the deliberately spectacular, found itself disarmed by it. A husband who still leans toward his wife after 15 years. A wife whose real smile is different from her public one, and who lets the real one show. That was it. That was all of it. And it was enough. The comments came in their thousands. They came from people who followed royal news closely and from people who had not thought about the monarchy in months. They came from people who openly admired the institution and, from people who held complicated views about it and, had not quite expected to find themselves moved by one of its representatives at a Commonwealth service on a Monday afternoon. They came from all over, from the 56 Commonwealth nations and, beyond them, from places where the British monarchy is history and, from places where it is still present tense. They came from people who had never met Catherine and William and who had, in some quiet, inexplicable way, been following their story for years. This makes me smile. Small, thoughtful gestures are the building blocks of a deeply loving, stable relationship. That comment. Over and over, in different words, in different languages, the same sentiment surfacing like something people had been waiting to say. The observation that love, at its most durable, is not a grand performance. It is a lean. A glance. The angle of a head that says, "You are still the person I want to turn to." For Catherine especially, the reaction carried a particular warmth that was inseparable from everything the past 2 years had meant. She had been away. She had been unwell in a way that could not be minimized or diplomatically softened into something comfortable. Cancer is cancer. The word has weight. And, the people who had watched her across the years of her public life, who had followed her from the photographs of a university student in a sheer dress to the composed, capable, deeply engaged princess who had made the role her own, had carried a worry for her that surprised some of them with its intensity. When she had announced her remission in January 2025, the response had been relief of the kind that people do not usually feel for people they have never met. But, this was Catherine, and, somewhere along the way, she had become something to the people watching her that was harder to define than celebrity or public figure or royal symbol. She had become a presence. Someone whose existence in the world felt, to many, like a good thing, not because of what she represented officially, but because of who she seemed to be privately. The person glimpsed in photographs taken at angles the official photographers had not intended. The mother clearly delighted by her children. The woman whose sense of humor surfaced in unexpected moments. The person who, when things became very difficult, chose dignity not as a performance but as an act of genuine self-respect. And she had come back. That was the story underneath all other stories at the 2026 Commonwealth Day service. Not the symphony, not the political significance of 56 nations gathering under a shared banner, not the careful management of a monarchy in its second Caroline year. The story was simpler and more human, a woman who had faced something frightening and had come through it, and was sitting in a pew beside her husband in the building where they had married, wearing the jewels of the woman who had shaped both their lives, and laughing at something he said. The return mattered. The fact that it was here, in this building, made it matter differently. Westminster Abbey holds William and Catherine's entire story. Their wedding was here. Their first Christmas as parents had its own sort of presence here, in the Carols concert that Catherine organized in 2021, the one where cameras caught William watching her as she performed her role as host with such obvious pride that it became one of the most shared images of their marriage. The building knew them before they fully knew themselves as what they had become. And, now here they were again, 15 years married, 3 children at home, a cancer battle behind them and a country ahead of them that they were being prepared, slowly and enormously, to lead. The weight of what they were moving toward was something William carried visibly in ways that Catherine balanced with her particular gift for being entirely present in a moment without letting the future pull at her expression. He has always been the more anxious of the two, in the way that heirs are often anxious, burdened by the knowledge of what is coming, the coronation that waits somewhere in the middle distance, the gradual assumption of a role that will require him to be, in ways no other position in the world requires, everything to everyone at once. He has spent his adult life preparing for an inheritance he has never quite wanted and has always accepted. There is a kind of sadness in that, if you look at it sideways. A kind of courage too. Catherine is the person who makes the weight lighter. Not by pretending it is not there. Not by cheerful deflection or careful management of his emotional reality. By being, quite simply, the person beside him, the fixed point, the private self, the one who knows all the versions of him that the public never sees and has chosen, every day for 15 years, to remain. This is what the cameras caught in the Abbey, even if they did not know that is what they were catching. They were catching the evidence of a marriage that had done its work. not a perfect marriage, no such thing exists, and William and Catherine have had their storms like everyone else, their years of tabloid speculation and private difficulty and the complicated, grinding challenge of being human beings inside an institution that demands you be something larger and more consistent than human. But a real marriage. A working one. The kind that has been tested and held. The kind that has learned, over time, the particular discipline of choosing each other inside the noise of everything else. When the service ended and the royal family moved to the steps of Westminster Abbey for the photographs that tradition required, Catherine emerged into the pale March light looking, everyone noted this, radiant. It is a word that gets applied to her so often it risks losing meaning. But, on this day it meant something specific. It meant that she was present in her own life. It meant that the woman standing on those steps was not going through the motions of recovery but had genuinely recovered, not just physically, but in the deeper sense of having returned to herself. The illness had asked something of her and she had given it and come back changed in ways she was still discovering, but undeniably back. She stood beside William on the steps, and the cameras clicked in their hundreds, and she smiled the public smile, warm, composed, entirely appropriate for the occasion. But every few seconds, between one formal photograph and the next, the smile shifted. Became something else. Became the other smile, the private one, the one that belonged to him. And each time it did, the cameras caught it, because cameras always catch the true thing when it surfaces through the performed thing, and the true thing here was unmistakable. She was happy. Not in a simple or uncomplicated way. Not in a way that had forgotten the year of fear and treatment and the quiet, enormous work of getting well. But happy in the way that people are happy when they have come through something and found that the things they love are still there, still intact, still warm, still worth every difficult day it took to return to them. William, walking beside her down the steps, placed his hand on her back for a moment. Briefly. The kind of touch that is so small it almost doesn't register. His palm between her shoulder blades, a second of pressure, gone before most cameras caught it. But some caught it. A few 100,000 people saw it in photographs and short clips that circulated through the rest of that day and into the next. That touch. It was the touch of a man who had spent the better part of 2 years afraid of losing something and had not lost it. It was the touch of a husband reminding his wife, without words and without any need of them, that he knew exactly what it had cost her to be standing here, and that he was glad, more than he could say in any public forum, more than the careful language of royal statements could hold, that she was. Royal experts and commentators did what they always do, they weighed in. There were observations about what the body language suggested. There were comparisons to previous public appearances. There were discussions about what Catherine's return to full public duties meant for the future of the monarchy, for the transition from King Charles's reign to whatever came next, for the symbolic weight of a woman who had become, in many people's minds, one of the most important figures in the institution's ability to remain relevant to the country it served. All of this was true. All of it was real and worth discussing. The institutional questions were legitimate and the historical weight was genuine. But none of it was what people were actually talking about in the hours after the service. What people were talking about was a lean in a pew. A private laugh. A hand on a back on the steps of an ancient building. The small, durable, completely ordinary vocabulary of two people who love each other, spoken out loud in the middle of a very public afternoon. There is a kind of story that the news cycle does not usually have room for, the story that is not about event or crisis or conflict or controversy, but simply about something true. Something that happened in front of cameras and was more real for all of that, more itself, more resistant to the machinery of spin and management and narrative control than anything more dramatically staged could have been. This was that kind of story. William and Catherine at Commonwealth Day 2026 did not make news because of anything they said or announced or accomplished. They made news because they forgot, briefly and beautifully, to be anything other than what they were. Because in the space of a long ceremony in a building full of history and symbolism and the complicated weight of everything a modern monarchy has to carry, they were simply a husband and wife who had made it through something hard together and were still, on the other side of it, finding reasons to lean toward each other. And the world, which is tired in ways it cannot always name, tired of spectacle, tired of performance, tired of the relentless engineered unreality of public life, saw that and recognized it. Not as royalty. Not as symbol. Not as the future king and queen of a country navigating the complicated question of its own future. As two people. Real ones. Who had built a life together that still, 15 years and 3 children and 1 cancer diagnosis and all the invisible weight of an extraordinary public existence later, looked like something worth having. There is no better ending to that story than the one that was there, in the Abbey, in the pale March light outside it, in the photographs that circulated for days after. The ending was already written, in the angle of a man's shoulder toward the woman beside him, and in the face of a woman who had come back from something frightening and was sitting in the building where she made her promises, wearing the jewels of a woman she had loved, and choosing, as she had chosen every day for 15 years, to be present for all of it. That was the moment. That was, for a great many people watching, more than enough.